Okay, so we're now live, and this is being recorded for those who need to watch it afterwards. Apologies, we have started slightly in, but hopefully you'll be able to catch up. We're now on 15a1 towards the end of the first paragraph. Okay, so we're saying that it says in the verse, let's just clarify the verse, a positive commandment, you should send out of the camp a person who has leprosy or a discharge called a zav, flowing from his body, you send him out of the camp. That's a positive commandment. Then we have a negative commandment, which says, "Leitamus machanehem," you shall not defile their camp, which means don't leave him there. Right? If he's impure, you must leave. That's a negative commandment. Now, these two verses represent a case of a prohibition preceded by the positive commandment. Why is it preceded by the positive commandment? Because you have to send him out. If you look at footnote 4, he'll explain why this is unrelated or independent of one another. The positive commandment is written prior to the prohibition and applies even when the prohibition is not violated. For if the person was in the temple when he contracted his tumah, he has not transgressed because he was there already. He never entered. He was there when he became impure. But he's nevertheless commanded to leave the temple immediately. So there's no negative commandment because he never entered impure. He entered pure. He became impure right while he was in the temple. So there's no negative commandment about entering the camp, right? But there's a positive commandment of getting him out. If he does so, he has not violated any prohibition. So if he stays there, there's no prohibition because he never entered impure. It's just a positive commandment. Get him out. If he's impure, get him out of the camp. Okay? So what do you see from here? And this is a case of a positive commandment that stands on its own. What's the positive commandment? Send out the impure individual from the camp if he's impure. That's the positive commandment. The negative commandment, don't let him enter into the camp if he's impure. But he's already entered. He's already in the camp. He became impure while he's in the camp. Too late now, right? So there's no negative commandment, but there's still a positive commandment. So the positive commandment of getting him out is unrelated to the prohibition. It precedes the prohibition. And what's the halacha about Malkus? What do we say about lashes? And we learned in the Mishnah above, in the list of those who incur Malkus, is the following person. Haba la mikdash tameh. One who enters the temple impure. One who enters the temple impure. Okay? Even though he can still perform the positive commandment to leave the temple, even though you can still get him out, right? So there's a positive remedy of getting him out of the camp. Nonetheless, we give him lashes. What does it show you? It shows you that when the positive commandment stands on its own and is unrelated to the negative prohibition, when he transgresses the prohibition, you'll give lashes, even though there's a positive remedy of getting him out. Why? Because when the positive remedy of getting him out stands on its own and is unrelated to the negative prohibition, in other words, will happen even if the negative prohibition doesn't apply, in a case like that, you keep the lashes in place. That's what he said. So we're seeing from the wording of the pasuk and the way the Mishnah rules is that Rabba Bar Chana, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, is actually right. We've now brought a proof for him to state that Malkus, lashes, will remain in place when the positive commandment is unrelated or independent of the negative prohibition. When the positive commandment, the remedy is there to remedy the negative commandment. When the positive commandment remedies the negative commandment, then you get rid of lashes. There's no need for lashes anymore because the positive commandment will remedy the negative commandment. The positive commandment will take away the prohibition. But when the positive commandment stands on its own and is unrelated or independent of, or precedes the negative commandment, then we say lashes will still apply. Okay, that's how we're saying. Give me a second, some water for a second. Okay, so now the question's asked, why does Rabbi Yochanan, why did he then retract his words? If we have proof for him, and the Mishnah and the Pasuk is agreeing with him, then why did he have to change his mind? Why did he say, no, I never taught it? Why did he retract what he said? That's the next line of the Gemara. Elamai taima kohadabe. So if that's the case, then Rabbi Yochanan has support for his law, and the verse and the Mishnah actually support the case, then why does he retract? Elamai taima kohadabe. So why is he retracting from his statement? That's the next question. Why is he retracting from his statement? It says Gemara, why is that? Mishum the kashyale oines. Because he has difficulty with the case of an oines, which is a case of a rapist. Okay, so let's look at the case of the rapist, and we'll see his problem. Because it says in a brisa, oines shegerish. What happened here? A man raped a woman, and according to Torah law, if a man raped a woman, he has to marry her, and he's not allowed to divorce her. This is a ruling put in place to protect the dignity of the woman. And he has to marry her and can't divorce her. Why? Because if she's divorced, she'll be all alone. And nobody's going to want to marry her because she's been raped by her husband, by her previous husband. So as a result, he has to remain married to her. Interesting case, because normally we would say that divorce is a mitzvah in the case of a husband and wife not living peacefully together with each other. The Torah would encourage divorce. What's the point of living side by side, living together or living not together while married? If the marriage is not working, you divorce. But here in this particular instance, the Torah is protecting her dignity. You raped her, therefore you're responsible to marry her and remain married to her. Okay, and responsible to sustain and provide for her, because otherwise on her own she'd be lost. So oines shegerish. What happens if a divorce, if an oines is married and then divorces his victim? Now he's transgressed the prohibition of he cannot divorce her. Okay, now let's see what the case is. In Yisrael, who, if he's a Yisrael, right, a non-Kohen, what does he do? He should remarry her. If he divorced her, then remarry her. So what did he do? You have to understand, he didn't go to a local Beis Din. Had he gone to a local Beis Din, they would have told him, sir, you can't divorce her. Right? We can't authorize this divorce. But in those days, they didn't necessarily need the Beis Din. He got two witnesses. He got a sofer, a scribe. He got two witnesses to witness the get. And he gave his wife a get. And then he finds out, oh boy, I couldn't do that. I wasn't supposed to do that because I can't divorce her. So what does he do? Remarry her. Because according to Torah, it's a mitzvah to remarry your divorced wife on one condition, that she didn't get married to somebody else. If she got married to somebody else in between, you can't remarry her again. But in this case, she didn't get married again. So what's the remedy? The remedy is go marry her. So we're saying here, machzir, he goes back, and he won't get lashes for divorcing her. Why won't he get lashes for divorcing her? Because he'll remarry her. Because by remarrying her, he fulfills the mitzvah of being a wife, being a husband. And he remedies the transgression. Okay. Now what happens if it's a kohen? What's wrong with the kohen? The kohen can't marry his divorcee. Once a kohen divorces his first wife or his wife, he can't remarry her. Why not? Because he's not allowed to marry a divorcee, and she's now a divorcee. In kohen, or if he's a kohen, okay, and he can't marry her, he'll get lashes because he's got no remedy. The other guy had a remedy, marry her, but this guy has no remedy, so he gets lashes. And he cannot take her back, he cannot remarry her because he's a kohen. Okay, that's the statement of the Brisa, of the teaching of the Brisa. Now, this caused Rabbi Yochanan great trouble. This caused Rabbi Yochanan great trouble. What was the trouble that it caused him? So we're now on the right-hand column on top. And it says like this. In Yisrael, if he's a Yisrael, machzir, he takes her back, and he doesn't get any lashes. Okay, that's the case. In Yisrael, if he's Yisrael, machzir ve'ein loke. Amai, meaning, why should there be no malchus there? Amai, why no malchus? So he said. So here's the question. This is a case of a positive commandment preceding the negative commandment. Why? Because he has to marry her whether he transgresses the prohibition of divorce or he doesn't transgress the prohibition of divorce. Either way, he has to marry her. Marrying the raped girl is a mitzvah he must do either way. Even if he doesn't divorce her, he still has to marry her. So he marries her before he divorces her. So in other words, the marriage concept, the mitzvah of marriage, is unrelated to the prohibition. It precedes the prohibition. It's independent of the prohibition. He must marry the lady that he raped. Unrelated to divorce. Whether you divorce or you don't divorce, you must marry her. So this is a typical case, a good case, of a positive commandment that stands unrelated to the negative prohibition that it actually remedies. Because it does remedy it, right? If you marry her, you remedy the prohibition. But it stands independent of the prohibition, because either way you're going to marry her. Whether you divorce her or you don't divorce her, you're going to marry her. Or you have to marry her. So in that case, it's another example of a positive commandment that stands alone. And what do we say? Says the next word, Belilki. And you give lashes. Here's the problem. You're giving lashes even though he remarries her. That's what it says. Sorry. Therefore, he should get lashes. Therefore, you should get lashes. Let's read this last paragraph. Therefore, he should incur lashes even though he remarries her. According to Rabbi Yochanan's original ruling, that a prohibition preceded by the positive commandment is subject to malchus. Meaning, even though there's a positive commandment that remedies the prohibition, so remarry her will remedy the prohibition, but because it stands alone, you're subject to malchus. Since the Brisa rules that the onus avoids malchus by remarrying her, how come it taught that he avoids malchus? This shows that the positive commandment, though it precedes the prohibition, still remedies the transgression of divorce. So even though it stands alone, and even though it precedes it, it still remedies it. And it's for this reason that Rabbi Yochanan retracted his statement. Even though what's interesting, just to point out, Rabbi Yochanan retracted because of this, right? But how come? What's wrong with the proof about the impure individual leaving the camp? The impure individual leaving the camp was actually a support for Rabbi Yochanan, for Rabbi Yochanan. And this is a contradiction to Rabbi Yochanan. So how come he's so frazzled, he's so baffled by this last case that he has to retract? What was wrong with his first case where he had a proof? Seems like it's an equal scale. He's got one proof and one. What's the opposite of a proof? contradiction. So I'm not sure why he buckles under this one. Maybe footnote number 7 will enlighten us. Okay, are we all here? Are we all with us? Okay, the footnote does discuss this. I'm a little concerned to go now into the footnote to try and figure this one out because it is a little bit complicated. Yeah, I'm going to leave it for now. I'm going to leave footnote number 7 for now. I think the goal of number 7 is try to understand why Rabbi Yochanan would retract if he has one source to support him and one source against him. Why would he follow the one and not the other? And for that, the footnote does try to come to answer that question, but we are going to leave that point for now. I'm going to hold back there on that last point.
Rabbi, if you could just clarify, going back to this retraction.
Yeah.
I'm just struggling with the retraction.
Yep.
So was it a retraction by saying no, he didn't say that? It's an odd way of retracting as it's set out here.
Right. So we brought that question in the footnote number 2 in the Aruch LaNer's question. Is if he's retracting, why did he say no? He should have said, yes, I said it, but I retract. Why did he say no? But if you go according to the Ritva's version, and they were actually speaking to the student, Rabbi Bar Chana. And the reason why he chose to say the word no, I never said it in the name of my teacher, is because he wanted to protect his teacher from the embarrassment, so to speak, of saying something and retracting. So therefore, they asked him, did you say this in the name of your teacher? And he said, no, I never said this in the name of my teacher. Almost like a white lie, in a way.
Oh, well, that's the point. That's the point. But who said actually no? Was it?
Well, that's exactly the point. If you look at the second line of the Art Scroll in the Art Scroll English, he's got in square brackets Rabbi Yochanan. But they said to Rabbi Yochanan, "Did you say it?" And he said no. But it's in square brackets because the Gemara doesn't say who it is. It just says Amru Loi. They said to him. So the Art Scroll put in one opinion, and they spoke to Rabbi Yochanan himself, and they said, "Did you say this ever?" But it's in square brackets. We don't know 100%. And according to the Ritva's version, he says, no, it wasn't actually Rabbi Yochanan himself who they spoke to. They spoke to the teacher, to the student who quoted Rabbi Yochanan, i.e. Rabbi Bar Chana, and he tried to protect the honor of his teacher, and therefore he said, I never said it. Which again, how could he say that if he actually did say it, right? It's a good question. And just to add to your question, which I don't think we have an answer for now, but just to add to your question, if you look at Rashi, if you look at the Hebrew text, and Rashi is on the right-hand column along the side. So if you look at the first lines of Rashi, Amma lahem loi, that's the quotation, Amma lahem loi. Rashi brings two words. Rashi says, Chazar boy, he retracted. But obviously, your question is that's not a term describing retraction. That's a term saying I never said it. Yeah, which in court that wouldn't stand you in good stead. You know, either you said it or you didn't say it. What do you mean no? No? Did you say it? No, I didn't say it. Well, I did say it, but I retracted. Yeah, I see the problem here. Maybe I'll end with this last point. I better understand the answer about the student trying to protect the honor of his teacher, even though that itself is still not fully understandable. But I better understand that no than the guy himself saying no. Why would the author himself or the origin himself say no? But I better understand the students trying to protect the honor of his teacher, which is still a bit of a question mark there.
But it seems like it's like a rubbing out what you said. It's in erasing the negative commandment that you breached that. And the positive commandments, it just sort of nullifies it. So you didn't say it.
so it ties into interesting. So the positive commandment removes the negative prohibition entirely. Right. So the retraction makes the statement disappear.
It wasn't a retraction, it was a deletion.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So now okay. So now what Ula is going to do is Ula is going to protect the contradiction here. Ula is going to say, I don't understand the problem. I don't see an issue with the discussion regarding the rapist. I don't know why Rabbi Yochanan had to retract, because for me, the story of the rapist actually doesn't cause any issues. That's what Ula is going to say now. Okay, so right, let's see now. Just 1 second. Okay. Amar Ula lo yomar lo yomar lo yomar lo yisiel isha. The Torah should not say that he should be a wife to him. The Torah should not say that they should marry. Ve'likmar mimoitzi shemra. And the obligation of marrying her could actually be derived from a different scenario. Okay? So in other words, a man who rapes a woman has to marry her. But what we're saying is, don't say clearly you have to marry her. I don't need a pasuk, a verse to tell me that he marries his rapist. I don't need a verse for that. I can actually learn it out of a completely different scenario. What's a different scenario? A different scenario is a case of moitzi shem ra. In other words, the defamer. Okay, the defamer is one who spreads a rumor about his new wife. Okay, and for example, he marries a woman and he finds out that she has been married before, or for example, if you look at footnote number 9, what does it mean he defamed her? In the case of a defamer, a man marries a virgin na'ara, a girl, and then denounces his wife to the courts, claiming that she committed adultery after their engagement, but before the marriage was consummated. And he brings witnesses to support his claim. He says, I know for a fact that she committed adultery. If these witnesses are proven false, the Torah may indicate the defaming husband suffer malchus, lashes, and be fined 100 slotim, money, that are given to his wife's father, because he, the husband, has defamed a virgin in Israel, and she shall be a wife unto him. He may not divorce her all his days. This is called a defamer, one who spreads a bad rumor about his wife, saying that she has committed adultery, when actually, in actual fact, she never committed adultery. So because he spread this rumor about her, he then has to marry her. There's a few things here. He marries her, he gets lashes, we said. Yeah, lashes, marries her, and pays a fine for marrying her. Okay, so now, if in such a case, you get you have to marry her, then I can automatically process that the rapist has to marry his wife too. I could do this by logic. It's the logic of a kal v'chomer, heavy and light. Uma moitzi shemra. Look at the case of the defamer. Shaloi asa ma'aseh. He never did an action. He never did anything wrong. He just said something. But he never did an action wrong. He said something wrong, but he never did something wrong. So look at the case of the defamer, who never did something wrong. Omer Rachamana, the Torah says, "V'loi tiyeh le'isha," and she shall be a wife unto him. Right? Meaning you never did anything to her. But the mere fact that you spread a rumor about her, you're therefore obligated to marry her. That's what we're saying. So what about a rapist? How much more so? That's the next line. Oines, what about a rapist, where it's against her will? Lo kol shekain? Is it not all the more so that he must marry her? If a defamer has to marry the girl, then how much more so if he raped her, he has to marry her? How much more so? So if that's the case, why do you need a verse? Last line of the page. So then why do you need a verse to say that the rapist is obliged to marry his wife or to stay married to his wife? Why do you need a verse? I would have known it automatically. I would have known it because of the defamer. If the defamer marries his wife, how much more so the rapist must marry his wife? So why do I need a special pasuk, a special verse for the rapist? Over the page, 215a2. So why do I need a proof for this? So the Gemara says in Einoi Inyan Lefonov. If the verse is not needed to teach you that he must marry her initially, right? If the verse is not needed to teach you that he must marry her initially, because that you would have known anyway, because of a kal v'chomer, because of a logic that's derived from the defamer, you would have known anyway that he marries his rapist. So you don't need the verse to tell you that he initially marries her. But then apply it to afterwards. To teach you. Shim Gerish, if he subsequently divorced her, Yachzir, he must remarry her. Okay, so what's his answer? His answer is, why do you need a special pasuk for the rapist? You don't need a special pasuk to tell me that he must initially marry her, because that will know. He must initially marry her. What the verse is actually telling me is that if he divorced her, he must marry her again. Okay, that's the answer for why do we need a pasuk? Why do we need a verse in the case of the rapist? It's to teach you that he has to marry her again if he divorced her, not to teach you that he must marry her initially, because that you would have known on your own, but to teach you that if he divorced her, he must marry her anyway. Now, here's the interesting point. What does it mean? What now happens is that the mitzvah, the positive commandment, is now a pure remedy, meaning the verse itself is a pure remedy for the prohibition. It's not a mitzvah that stands on its own and that's preceded on its own, right? Or independent of the prohibition. It's not, because we said you don't need a verse to teach you that he initially marries her. That you'll know by yourself. So this particular verse that says he must marry her is speaking about a very specific scenario about a guy who dafka divorced his wife, and now he must go ahead and marry her again. This mitzvah, this positive mitzvah, is no longer a mitzvah that's independent or precedes the prohibition or remains on its own. It's actually a positive commandment that's dependent on and relying on the prohibition. If you divorced her, you must bring her back and marry her. So because in this particular case, this is Ulla's answer. Ulla's saying, in this particular case, the positive commandment about marriage is actually a remedy. It's a pure remedy for the prohibition. And because it's a pure remedy for the prohibition, you lose Malchus. Malchus falls away. There's no lashes anymore. Because there's a mitzvah that's directly related to the remedy. That's what we're saying. Ulla's saying a very interesting story. Ulla's saying this is a very interesting case where you have to marry her initially.
Is the river frozen? Oh, my.
It's frozen. It's frozen.
Okay. Going to sort out his Wi-Fi. Any volunteers?
It's not at the shul, Russell.
No.
You bought the Wi-Fi for the wrong place.
Yeah, looks like it.
Lewis, maybe you can carry on.
We're on 15A 1. The middle paragraph, read for yourself. It's self-evident.
Maybe he's gone to the chuppah of the second marriage. I don't know. I wonder if when you get married for the second time, the same woman, you have to wear a white dress. Lewis, what do you think?
I'll get back to you.
Which kid walks her down the aisle? No, but this is strange that we've stayed on and he's gone off.
It's made Russell the host.
Russell must carry on. Sorry, Lewis.
No, I'm not the host. Why am I the host, Lewis?
Ask Mr. Zoom.
You're the host with the most.
Where do you see I'm the host?
With the most.
Yeah, he's back.
He's back.
Apologies. My internet just dropped.
Rabbi, you're looking for some team to sort out the Wi-Fi. We are. I know somebody's very good with Wi-Fi. I'm just joking.
My Wi-Fi just dropped. Okay, sorry about that. I'm gonna wrap up this one more paragraph before we finish, because I just want to finish this answer. I find this quite a fascinating point. I got cut off in my last point that I was about to say, and that was that my last point I was about to say was that according to this answer, Rabbi Yochanan doesn't have to retract, because he'll agree. It all makes sense now. Why, in the case of the rapist, it's a unique scenario. Anyway, we're gonna finish off one more paragraph on the 15a2 second paragraph, and the Gemara argues and says as follows: you can't really use the Kal V'chomer logic to motivate why he should marry the rapist. You can't learn the obligation to marry her from the case of the moitzi shemra of the defamer. You can't really do it. The ikla mifrach, because you can actually object that conclusion. Mala moitzi shemra. If you look at the moitzi shemra, shekain loike umishale. Look at the defamer. The defamer is a very severe type of transgression, according to the Torah, where he gets lashes and he pays a monetary payment to the father of the girl, right? In addition to having to marry her. What does it show you? It shows you that in the eyes of the Torah, in the eyes of Hashem, the defamer is worse than the rapist. Interesting why that is, but the defamer is worse than the rapist. Okay? I'm not even sure if there is logic here, but we just see the facts. He pays a payment, he gets lashes, he then marries her. Quite a detailed punishment for defaming a girl, right? And the crime of rape, however, is there's a fine, but there's no lashes to rape. So what does it show you? It shows you that the case of moiti shemra, of defaming, is worse off. And if it's worse off, it therefore cannot be a proof for the case of a rapist. Because I could say that the reason why the defamer has to marry her is because it's a more severe type of transgression. How do I know it's a more severe type of transgression? Because there's payment and malchus and lashes. But in the case of rape, where there's a payment but there's no lashes, maybe it's a more lenient type of prohibition. And therefore, maybe he wouldn't have to marry her. How do you compare A and B? How do you say that because of A, therefore B as well? Because of A meaning the defamer. Because of the defamer, you have to also marry the rapist. Who said? It's maybe two different types of prohibitions. One's more strict than the other.
Well, Rabbi, they actually mentioned in the Nahara her actual age, between 12 and 12 and a half years old. For the rapist, they don't mention how old the woman is that he rapes. So maybe it's got to do with the fact that the girl is between the age of 12 and 12 and a half.
Aha, right. So Na'ara is that age, Na'ara. He's 12 and a half. Interesting.
Now, maybe that's the reason why it's so strict, because of her age.
It's worse off. I wonder why. I see your difference. I just wonder why that would be a reason to make it more harsh, because of her Na'ara status. Of 12 and a half. In other words, why? Because she's younger. Is that what you're saying? So we have more sensitivity.
She's younger.
More sensitivity to the younger girl. Whereas the rapist,
she's hardly an adult. She's hardly an adult.
Yeah.
So to protect her, maybe, I don't know. I'm just thinking aloud.
I'm saying, whereas the rapist is of any age, to be honest.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right, that's fine. Good point. Not sure if enough of a reason to differentiate, but it's an interesting distinction nonetheless. It's interesting why the one is younger, and that could be the reason why we're so strict, is because of the younger status of this girl. Okay, so I'm going to end here. I'll tell you what the next paragraph does. If you just go to the heading, the Gemara now wants to modify Ullah's statements. Ullah was the one who compared the defamer to the rapist. And we now challenged Ullah to say, well, how do you compare the two? The two cases are quite different. The next paragraph we're going to learn next week, will help understand Ullah's statement better and maybe understand what the comparison is between the two. But for now, we're going to leave it at that. on 15A2, second